we're gonna look at another game by Anatoly Karpov. In this game he played with the white pieces against Nunn, and he demonstrated how to exploit the weaknesses of black's pawn structure in a classical line of the knight f variation. So Karpov always played bishop e2 against the knight f, well, most of the time. And here we get a typical structure where black has a weakened square on d5 that white will try to occupy with his pieces and exploit as a target, as an outpost for his knights. But of course things are not that simple, and there's a lot of counterplay that black gets, and for one thing he gets to develop his pieces rather comfortably. So Karpov restricts black pieces and prevents b5. Now black wants to play knight b6 and put the knight on c4, and then if possible capture with the rook and put the pressure on the e-pawn. So Karpov prevents that knight maneuver with a5. That also creates another potential outpost for the white pieces on b6, even though that one is more difficult to exploit. Black puts the queen on the open file, and now Karpov starts to build up pressure against the d-pawn, and also this move goes to make it more difficult for black to play d5. Black reinforces potentially the d-pawn, and in some lines the file opens up, so he also wants the rook to be on that file for that reason. Another line here is rook f e8, and that also has its advantages. So after rook f d8, Karpov plays queen e1, that is to open the rook to work on the file. Also sometimes the queen may transfer to other squares from here, but mostly it's just to get the queen away from the attack of the black pieces. Black puts queen on c6 to cover up d5 and also to put pressure on e4, so now e4 is being attacked. The downside is that now if the queen stays here, it may cost black a tempo to remove it when white goes for the classical maneuver and transfer the knight to b4 and then to d5. But for now it is justified because it forces white to defend this pawn. And notice that if white defends the pawn differently, say like this, then black is going to break through with d5. So after queen c6, white goes queen to bishop to f3, and that prevents d5, of course, for now. The bishop left diagonal, so black puts the bishop here, and white plays knight c1, a strange move, but it begins a typical maneuver. The knight goes to a2 and then to b4, and white's slightly better here, but we'll see how carefully Karpov exploits that advantage. So now the queen has to go, and now white could put the piece on d5 immediately, say like this, and that's mostly fine and dandy, and this is a reasonable position for him. But he doesn't want to hurry. He wants to first, nothing's going to stop him from doing this, so he wants to first improve the position of his pieces. So he transfers the bishop to g2, where it's slightly better placed. So g3, rook c7, bishop here, and only now and then he drives the knight away, the bishop away, another tempo gain, and only then he puts that knight on d5. And after white exchanges and black exchanges, we see that white has a couple of advantages: pressure on the d file, two bishops, better control over light squares. So white, I think, has a stable edge here. Black really has to go back and look for where he could have improved. Sometimes I think one of the improvements comes from playing knight to c5 earlier, not later. But for now, black has to defend this d-pawn. White builds up pressure against the d-pawn. So black would ideally want to play knight to bishop to f6 and drop this knight to d4, but that's never easy. And white's probably going to capture that piece there. For now, he can't leave d6 because then he can't do this because then pawn would fall. But he tries to do similar idea. He wants to instead exchange bishops, and Karpov doesn't fall for that. He doesn't want to allow any counterplay. He doesn't want to end up with this bishop, which is relatively bad, and he keeps his good bishop. All his pawns are placed on light squares, so this is a good bishop, and he keeps that alive. And there's a little bit of back and forth, but in the end Karpov just continues to build up the pressure, and queen e2 is an important move because it defends c4. And you would ask, why is that important? Well, we're gonna have to ask, what is white gonna do in this position? How is he gonna break through? If he just sits, black will also just sit. And white's plan is to play b4, b5. That is a very important break, and he totally plays queen e2 just to not drop the c pawn and to facilitate b5. That's his main plan. And even though black tries to break through with b6, I mean, he's hoping to get something like this, where he has pressure against the b pawn, even though this is weakened, but so is this. But Karpov, of course, doesn't fall for that, and instead, after b6, he goes b4. And the idea is that when black takes, Karpov just pushes his pawn, and this pawn now is very dangerous. It's so dangerous that black has to give up an exchange just to, you know, well, the rook is trapped basically, and he wants to really get rid of this bishop. He just gives up an exchange for that. And here Karpov's up an exchange, and this is probably quite winning. There's very little counterplay. White just has to block the a pawn and improve the position of his pieces. Nunn was in time trouble here, so the game ended rather quickly. White has a blockade against this pawn, and also this bishop came to its ideal diagonal. It might put pressure on f7 later, or pretty soon actually. In time trouble, it's really hard to defend this position, so Nunn played knight e6, and even though he put his knight to a beautiful square, now the a pawn is really hard to defend, so it cannot be defended actually. And when it got taken, when white took it, black resigned because he's down a pawn, he's down an exchange, and white has a beautiful passer, and black's got no counterplay. All in all, a great game by Karpov. Shows how to exploit this knight outpost on d5, and one thing I learned from this game is that you don't necessarily have to go for it immediately. You have to combine other advantages in your position, and only then you can exploit that beautiful outpost on d5. And black, of course, has to find other ways to improve his play in the opening, because even this position is quite unacceptable for black, in my opinion.